To fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. Then we can go ahead and get started. We always have to wait just a little bit longer for YouTube to get alive and well, but it looks like it's working. It's trying hard. It's coming online. It is ready to go. It's looking good. And so we can go ahead and get started, can't we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. Throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice, and it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today because we've got a lot to get into. Been a busy week talking about a lot of coronavirus news. And so we're going to start there. There is this congressional mask debate taking place with our elected officials because that's about all they're useful for, is to bicker about a bunch of nonsense regarding masks. So Nancy Pelosi came out and she called House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy over with the GOP a moron. And so we're going to debate the legitimacy of that allegation. But there's a lot of back and forth going on here. She ordered all Congress people and all of their staff and basically anybody who comes into the Congressional building that goes over to the House side of things to put a mask on. And there was a new order that came out from the Capitol Hill Police that is basically saying if you don't do that, you're going to be subject to arrest. So we're going to go through that. Congresswoman Kat Kamek actually posted that on Twitter. And so we can go through this bulletin that was posted up over in the Congressional building. So we'll take a look at that. Then we're going to change gears and shift our attention over to the Biden DOJ, the Department of Justice. They came out with a new memorandum. It's entitled The Federal Law Constraints on Post-Election Audits, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to now try to criminalize any of these audits that are taking place throughout the country. There's a big memorandum that they submitted, and we're going to go through it a little bit. And I want to show you what their basis is for why these audits are essentially, borderline. I think this has a very big chilling effect on these audits, and that's kind of the purpose of this new memo. So we're going to go through it. There's two ways that they're trying to sort of chill down and tamper down these audits, and so we'll break down what is going on there. And then lastly, we got to talk about this infrastructure bill, because apparently there is an agreement for about a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. We're going to see what's in that. The bill, of course, has not been written or finalized yet. We have a bipartisan agreement with some senators who are saying, we're going to cram this down your throats. You're welcome, America. And we really don't know what's in it yet, but we do have a 57-page summary, which is telling us they're going to spend about $550 million over the next 5 years. And so we're going to go through that. We also have some reactions from the usual suspects. We have AOC, Cori Bush. They're unhappy with this. And the bill actually touches on cryptocurrencies a little bit, so we'll talk about that as well. There's a lot to get into, as you can tell. If you want to be a part of the show, a couple places to do that. Over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, where we have a form that we can use to sort of ask questions, take questions from you, the audience. Just fill that out, get that submitted. We'll do our best to get all of those on the air, but sometimes we do have to move a little bit quickly because of time. We're also over on YouTube, and now you can send super chats. Here was one from yesterday. We saw this one pop up yesterday when we were talking about the variants. And so if you submit a super chat over on YouTube, it's going to pop up and it's going to look something like that. And so, of course, we appreciate your support. However you choose to support the show, we're just grateful that you're here. And without any further ado, let's get into the news of the day. Masks. Put them on, take them off, wear 2, wear 4, wear 25, who knows anymore. But now the U.S. House of Representatives is going to reimpose their mask mandate. So we've seen this back and forth all throughout America. Put the mask on, take the mask off, and it's even gone so far as to sort of spread around our congressional building. So we're going to take a look at what's going on here because there's a back and forth. Nancy Pelosi came out and called Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy a moron for not complying with her new mask mandates. And then today, when everybody woke up and went to work, they saw this bulletin in the Capitol building that says, if you're not wearing a mask like Nancy Pelosi ordered, we're going to arrest your butts and take you right down to jail. And so now the Republicans are saying, well, we're not going to mask up anyways, and we're just going to not comply. So we're going to break down this story. Let's start with a headline over from the New York Times, just so we get a little bit of background on what's happening here. U.S. House of Representatives will once again require masks in the chambers, right? So on and off and on and off and off. Why? The Delta variant. Of course, senators are being encouraged to mask up as well, but they're not required to do so. Where did this all come from? Earlier this week, there was a doctor named Dr. Brian Monahan. He's Congress's doctor. He said that he was recommending the change based on the CDC guidelines, which we've already seen have changed like 50 times this week. And so we're going to take a look at that. Speaker Pelosi then made the change official on the House floor on Wednesday morning. Dr. Monahan wrote for Congress, representing a collection of individuals traveling weekly from various risk areas. He says all individuals should wear well-fitted masks and a medical-grade filtration mask when they're in an interior space. Okay, so we've seen a lot of this. Biden's out doing it today. Psaki was out doing it all week, and I think her deputy was out today. They're all talking about, well, everything's changing. The science is changing. Our new numbers are changing. Data is changing. And so we have to change our recommendations based on the new data. And so now we have, okay, now it's time to mask up again. Now, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle here because Dr. Brian Monahan set a different set of rules for the Senate. The Senate, of course, is a much smaller body, 100 senators versus 435 House representatives. And so sort of they didn't have the same strict recommendations as senators as the House representatives did. And so there was a little bit of a parting of the seas over there. Some people can mask, some people cannot. But anyways, the Republicans are just upset about it in general. So here is Kevin McCarthy. After Nancy Pelosi started hinting that it was going to be a mask bonanza in Congress, he said, make no mistake, the threat of bringing back masks is not a decision based on science, but it's based on liberal government officials who want to continue the perpetual pandemic state, which is, I think, a pretty astute observation here for somebody who, according to Nancy Pelosi, is a moron. We have actually seen this unfold right in front of our very eyes. It's sort of this perpetual, okay, we're scared again. We're scared again. We're scared again. Be scared again. And we're going to dive into a lot of that as the show continues. Now, many people have been asking to see some of the data. We know that some of these changes sort of felt like whiplash. We heard from another journalist who was in the White House press briefing room earlier this week who asked Jen Psaki specifically and said, hey, what are you going to tell Americans that have whiplash from all of the CDC's policy changes? You make a decision, you sort of revoke the decision, you have a celebration day. Joe Biden comes out and says, it's a great day in America. We can take our masks off. Scratch that. 2 months later, put them back on. So many people are wondering, what the heck is the CDC doing? And over from cron.com, experts are now asking to see the data as well. What is the justification for the new policy? Over from Crone, written July 28th by a number of different people from the Washington Post, they say that new recommendations from federal health officials this week call on vaccinated Americans to wear face masks. People who've had their shots and become infected with Delta can harbor large amounts of the virus just like unvaccinated people. That means they can become spreaders, so they got to put a mask on. But the CDC did not publish the new research. So they just made this policy change without giving any data. In the text of the updated masking guidance, the agency merely cited CDC COVID-19 response team unpublished data 2021. So everybody's saying, okay, well, so you made the change. You say it's based on the science. We heard from Jen Psaki earlier in the week. They said, well, what's the basis for the change? And she said, well, government data. And they said, well, we need some more, a little bit more than that, Jen. And she said, how about this? We're saving lives. And if you disagree with that, well, you must be wanting to kill grandma, as has been the case for the last 18 months. Some scientists have their own message, says, show us the data. They're making a claim that people with Delta who are vaccinated and unvaccinated have similar levels of viral load. But nobody knows what that means, said the associate professor at the Yale Law School or Yale School of Public Health. Says it's meaningless unless we see the data. And so this is what a lot of people have been, battling about. It sort of feels like the party that is so attached to science is making a bunch of decisions that they are claiming are based on science, but many people are asking about it. Where's the data, including this Yale School professor? All right, so here's Nancy Pelosi now as this mask kerfuffle has been happening in our high school Congress classrooms, we have Nancy Pelosi, who is then walking to her car, and somebody says, "Oh, Kevin McCarthy is now sort of opposing your mask mandate there, Madam Pelosi. What do you have to say about that?" And she goes on her little, tirade, and then you're not going to be able to hear it closely. You may have to have headphones in. You may have to listen to this close. We're going to play the clip twice, and what we'll see is at the very last minute, she says, "He's a moron," talking about Kevin McCarthy. He's a moron. And, I know a lot of people are upset about that provocative language coming out from Nancy Pelosi. I'm not a particular, I don't have a lot of problems with that, right? Donald Trump tended to use some tough language and provocative language and colorful language, and I appreciate that. I'm not particularly concerned about the moron thing, more as much as I am with boneheaded policy decisions that are not based in science, that are political gestures, and then the follow-up, which is arrests if you don't comply with Madam's rules. So that's really the big issue, but we all got to see the moron clip. So here is Nancy Pelosi calling Kevin McCarthy, the Republican, a moron. Here she is.
Mandate from him. I have nothing to say about that except we honor it.
Leader McCarthy says it's against the science.
One more time. Get ready for it.
Mandate from him. I have nothing to say about that except we honor it.
Leader McCarthy says it's against the science.
Such a moron, she says. So Peter McCarthy says that your decision's against the science. She says he's such a moron. And, the Republicans are not far from that. I don't want to speak to Kevin McCarthy, specifically, but yeah, the Republicans have done a bunch of moronic stuff or have not done really anything. So she's not far off on that. But the point here is it's about the actual mask policy. McCarthy's criticism here, he's not calling her names. His criticism is that it's not based in science. She says, well, he's a moron for believing that. And so she got asked about that today in wherever this was. And she kind of doubles down on it. She says, yeah, no, I mean, basically it's unwise. She's not going to use that same language again. But here's Pelosi clarifying what she meant.
Is Kevin McCarthy a moron, and if so, why?
I said earlier in my comment, science. On almost every subject that you can name, science is the answer. Whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's a health crisis, whether it's our preeminence in the world in technology, science. To say that wearing a mask is not based on science, I think, is not wise, and that was my comment. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, so now we have a little bit of a disagreement, don't we? We've got a situation where a lot of people are asking for the data. We had the Yale associate professor from Yale. He wants some information about, hey, what's the basis for this? You saying that there's good evidence that the Delta variant can cause vaccinated people to carry a viral load. So let's see the data. Where did it come from? And what's the basis of the decision from the CDC to require everybody to mask up? If it's all science, let's see the data. And so there are now rumors going around that the data is based on this study that came from India that is based on vaccines that aren't even in the United States, that are not being used here. And so, of course, right, we got to be cautious about making sure that we're not spreading medical information or anything like that. Certainly not, I'm not intending to do that. But this is directly from the Speaker, the House Minority Leader now. This is Kevin McCarthy. And so he's giving us a little bit of data about what the CDC is basing their decision on. What data are they basing their decision on? Why are they changing these mask guidelines all of a sudden? He was out holding a press conference talking about Pelosi and her leadership. This was, I believe, today or yesterday, very recently.
Think about what the CDC did just this week. They forced vaccinated Americans to wear masks because of a study in India about a vaccine that's not even in America, that has not been peer-reviewed. The CDC has become a political arm of the administration. It wants to control every element of our life.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a moron to me. That sounds pretty accurate. Now, I don't know much about the study or where he's getting that data, but he is the House Minority Leader, so he should have access to all of that information or be in the know. And so if he's telling us that there was a study based in India that was based on a vaccine that we don't even use, it wasn't peer reviewed, and the CDC just goes, oh yeah, perfect. That study works great for us because we want to impose masks. We want to impose lockdowns. We want to freak everybody out to drive up the vaccination rates. And so that study's perfect. That gives us a good justification and very good basis for now coming in here and changing the rules because we're a party of science. We can just rely on that study that's not peer reviewed that comes from India that is about a vaccine that nobody in the United States is taking to implement and to influence our policy decisions. So that's what's happening, which if that's the case, now it feels like that's an agency that is out in search of a solution. They're saying we have this problem. We have Americans that are not getting vaccinated at quick enough rates or to the degree that we would be liking. And so we have to go find justification to cause some pressure points, to cause some pain points, which we've already seen discussed. People who are medical commentators were on CNN talking about this specifically. We've seen this from other people, former, I think, Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius, if I got that name right. I recall that she was out there saying that we have to make it difficult for the unvaccinated. We have to sort of penalize certain people in this country that don't want to comply with the government requests or soon to be mandates. So this is where it becomes problematic. If the CDC is now just sort of identifying a problem and then finding a study to justify some policy changes, that certainly sounds political more so than it is medicinal or therapeutic in any way, shape, or form. This also goes beyond the masks, okay? I've been saying on this show that we're going to see COVID crimes, that we're going to start to see people getting arrested and charged with COVID crimes for not masking up or for lying about their vaccination status or for whatever. Gavin Newsom was comparing these people to drunk drivers, even though there are about 30 logical fallacies with that analogy and that comparison. But we're going to see more and more of it. And we see it right in our own congressional house. It's not even far away. And it's going to be coming to a city near you, if I had to guess. Congresswoman Kat Cammack was in Congress today. She said, in today's edition of Pelosi's abuse of power, Capitol Police have been directed to arrest staff and visitors to comply with her mask mandate for vaccinated individuals. For members, if you're a congressperson, they advise not arresting, but, quote, reporting members to the sergeant at arms for their failure to comply, right? So if you are Congresswoman Kat Cammack, well, you can go in there without a mask if you're vaccinated, or if you're not. Got to wear, a mask. If you don't, she'll be okay. But her secretary, her assistant, her clerk, or whatever they call them, are not. If they're not wearing a mask, they're subject to arrest because she's a congresswoman. She has special privileges. And so you can see how that might put a rub in your day, especially if you have people who are not going to be wearing the mask, maybe because they are vaccinated or have other objections to it. Who is this congresswoman? She is over from, where is this? Florida, Florida's district. Looks like she is the youngest GOP woman in the 117th Congress, so that's pretty neat. She's over on Twitter at Rep. Kat Cammack, and so she posted this. Let's see what's going on in here. Bulletin posted, just like, when you go to school and you got a bulletin, your assignments are due. Wearing of masks is mandatory at all time for the U.S. Capitol Police personnel or USCP personnel in interior spaces on Capitol grounds. This is coming from the Office of the Chief of Police, and this was published July 28th, comes from the U.S. Capitol Police, we can see here. And there is now, after this was published, some, bickering back and forth. Nancy Pelosi's office is saying, oh, we had nothing to do with this. And she's saying it was the Capitol Police. It's whatever the Capitol Police want to do, they can do. And you start asking yourselves, okay, but it was your mask policy. You ordered that. Certainly, if you didn't want the Capitol Police, given that you're the Speaker of the House, I would imagine that a sternly worded letter from you towards the U.S. Capitol Police might encourage them to change this policy and not arrest Congresspeople's staff as they're coming into work that day. Just a thought, but I could be wrong about that. But here it says, on July 27th, CDC issued new guidance. Everybody's got to wear a mask. This is from the U.S. Capitol Police. According to the CDC, the Delta variant is very problematic. We're very scared about it. Based on this information, the Office of the Attending Physician who we read from, Dr. Monahan earlier, advised Congress to follow the CDC guidance, require mask wearing in interior spaces to help reduce the risk of COVID-19 infection. All right. Therefore, the police say, effective immediately, to promote the good health and well-being of our employees, all USCP personnel must wear a mask at all times when in interior spaces throughout the Capitol grounds. Everybody, all times, must wear a mask. Okay. In addition, effective immediately, at all FLETC sites, masks are required for all individuals on site and social distancing as well. U.S. Capitol Police Office of Occupational Safety will be contacting everybody to assess inventories of masks and deliver additional masks. Also, U.S. Capitol Police officers who work in the House Division or the House side of the Capitol shall enforce this mask policy on all staff and visitors within the above noted locations. Okay, so remember how we talked about this? In the Capitol building, you sort of have these two wings. Anybody who's over on that wing shall enforce this mask policy. It's mandatory. There's no discretion. If you're a U.S. Capitol Police officer and you see somebody with a mask off, it's a mandatory policy. You shall enforce this for staff and visitors in those locations. This includes all House office buildings, okay, so where the staff is, the hall of the House, and House committee meetings. Everything. This also applies to members of Congress, but you can't arrest members of Congress for not wearing a mask. Any member who fails should be reported to the House Sergeant at Arms. So, you know, a congressperson, when they're in congressional duties, they have certain levels of immunity that prevent them from being arrested. This is sort of to stop a dictator from arresting all the legislators to prevent them from passing a bill to depose that tyrant, something like that. If a visitor or staff member fails to wear a mask or a request is made to do so, the visitor or staff shall be denied entry to the House office buildings or the House side of the Capitol. Any person who fails to either comply or leave, subject to arrest for unlawful entry. Sounds like a criminal trespass type of violation. If a staffer who is accompanying a member refuses to wear a mask, that refusal should be noted. Reported to a supervisor, will refer the House to the Sergeant at Arms. As always, thank you for washing your hands. OAP Test Center is available. Signed off by the J. Thomas Manger, Chief of Police over from the Capitol Police. And so, you know, there it is. It's actually in writing. It's a bulletin. COVID crimes. Not wearing your mask, you're going to get arrested for it in our own congressional buildings. So if you think that it's not coming to a town near you, it's happening in our federal government, right in the congressional buildings. So of course it's coming to a location near you. There's no question about that. And we're going to see more and more of it. Now, the Republicans naturally made a spectacle here because they should, because this is a spectacle. And so they seized it with total regard. Let's take a look at what happened here. Walking their way into the House chambers, here is the entire congressional delegation from the GOP. Guess what? They're not wearing masks, are they? No masks. There they go. No masks at all. So those are the Republicans. I think that's Caldwell, I forget his name. Is that Marjorie Taylor Greene? I don't know. And so they're all walking in there with no masks. And I think as I was starting the show, there was a lot of this tomfoolery going on over there. So we'll see what is happening with that. Let's take a look at some of the questions that are coming in so we can jump into those. We've got some great ones coming in over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I've got those queued up right here, ready to rock and roll. And we've also got some super chats that came in. So let's give a quick shout out. We'll go over here to, I got this queued up, so we'll go here first. We have NY Renal MD, the doctor's in the house, says, CDC has bungled this pandemic. Bandanas and shirt sleeves, along with surgical masks, offer almost no protection. The only protection for masks are for health professionals, frontline workers. Okay. He says the mandate is dividing us and confusing the public. People should find out their antibody status to COVID, ask their doctor on what to do to protect them from infection. So, you know, we always got to be careful with, you know, any medical advice or information. So, I think the big takeaway here is consult with your doctor, I think, is the reasonable way to approach this entire conversation as it relates to vaccines, right? It's have a conversation with your doctor about that. And your doctor will be the person who's best advised or in a best position to advise you about what to do. The problem with all of these mandates is exactly that. They are mandates, and they are coming from the federal government that are not medical professionals, that have all sorts of conflicts of interest and have a bad history of being honest and acting with integrity. People are sick of it. And so that is why people are now hesitant about any of these mandates, because it's a mandate. And that might make sense because you're getting information and demands from non-medical professionals that don't know your physical condition, don't know your medical history. That seems problematic to me. All right, good to see you, Doc. We have another one here from Ghost Gunner is in the house. Says, Rob, it's just 14 days to slow the spread to do your part. Yeah, I forgot about that. Why do you hate old people so much? This whole thing is just about control from Ghost Gunner. Yeah, 14 days, just a quick 14 days. And I remember then I was really not happy about it, but we said, okay, fine, 14 days. I guess we'll do that. But it's turning into 14 months, longer than that now, isn't it? We'll see. I don't know why I hate grandma so much. I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with me. And I also didn't know that sort of liberty was directly related to killing grandparents. But all right, so good to see you, Ghost Gunner. We had some super chats coming in, so let's make sure we don't miss those. We had Mark Hill says, there is no test for the Delta variant, and the CDC quit using the PCR test. That is over on YouTube. Says, yeah, so there's no, right, because it's COVID, right? So you'd have to sort of, I think, do a deeper analysis. You're not going to see those over-the-counter tests that just identify it. Good information. Thank you, Mark Hill, for that. We had another one come in. I think that one just popped in. We have another one here from Copper Lobo. Says, and they wonder why people don't want to get vaccinated. America has lost all trust in government. Good to see you, Copper Lobo. Appreciate that one. Yeah, because the government is just botching the responses, right? If they keep flip-flopping, if they keep doing things that show that there's really no basis for the promises that they made, that's a problem. And to be more clear about what I'm talking about, if they told us that if you get vaccinated, you can take your mask off. Then they both got vaccinated, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, in December of 2020, right after the election. Then they continued to wear masks all the way up until 2 months ago, which would have been May. So for about 5 months, while they were vaccinated, they were wearing masks, showing people through their message, through their symbolism of wearing a mask, that maybe there is something wrong with something happening here. Why, if you're vaccinated, do you still need to wear the mask? Joe Biden's wearing double masks. Now, I'm not saying that is medical or that is a logical conclusion, but that's what people perceive. That's what the world sees. And we saw that with Kamala Harris going down, walking side by side with the Mexican president. She's masked, he's not. People can draw their own conclusions from that. They watch what you do, not what you say. That's why it's problematic. All right, we have some other ones. Justin F. was in the house with a very nice super chat. Says, thank you for your work you do. Keep it up, sir. Thank you, Justin F. I really appreciate that. Very generous of you. Thank you for your support here. And Kareem165 says, I noticed every time we're about to get out of this pandemic, they come up with a new scientific reason for a lockdown. Stop traveling again. I know many here who got the vaccine just to be free. And look what's happening, right? Travel restrictions. The White House was out today talking about that they may actually comply. If the CDC comes out and recommends new lockdowns, yeah, they're going to follow the science because they keep saying that. So we have Nancy Pelosi, who's over here on Locals. How'd she get in here? Nancy Pelosi says, how dare you oppose my mask mandate? Robert, you better be careful or I'll have you impeached. Impeach me, Pelosi. Impeach me away. First of all, I wrote the impeachment party template, which was better than your garbage articles of impeachment, which we read here. I used them as a template, and I improved them massively because you guys obviously are terrible at impeaching people. You tried twice, didn't work. We also have Super Iron Bob says, McCarthy will talk but not do anything to bring in the fools in the party into line. I'm getting tired of the amount of talk without action and the allowances for those who would backstab their constituents in his party. That's from Super Iron Bob. Yeah, look, I have no love for the Republicans or any conservatives. I don't even know what they're doing. Is there a Republican leader who's standing up? I mean, in Congress, right? DeSantis is doing a bunch. Abbott is doing a bunch in their localities. But the only real, a handful of Congress people who are saying anything about any of these new momentum shifts, Rand Paul, any other senators from the Republicans? No, they're useless. They're just along for the ride. We have another no name here says, Arresting people for masklessness will give glorified security guards like the Capitol Police something to do. The clips yesterday looked like they were auditioning for the Oprah show. Yeah, oh my gosh, that's so right. They would not last one night with Portland cops who night after night have dangerous objects thrown at fires started. They are an embarrassment to real cops. You know, I was watching Officer Fanoni was on Dans Le Monde show yesterday on CNN, and there was a 9-minute clip that was passing itself around Twitter, and it was one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen, right? I've spoken with many officers, and the way that this conversation was happening was hysterical. I actually clipped the whole thing. We're probably going to talk about it in another show or a different segment, but it was actually, like, the guy is clearly auditioning. It is absolutely an Oprah show. I was thinking about it. I was thinking, oh, this is just the pre-audition for his book tour, which of course is going to be coming. I'm Not Gases here says midterms are coming soon. Polling isn't as favorable as the Dems would like, so ramping up the COVID hysteria seems like a strategic move to energize their base and, if need be, provide more justification for election shenanigans like universal mail-in ballots. Yeah, COVID last time was the justification for all sorts of election shifts. Moving things around, like pushing dates back, allowing more universal mail-in balloting, waiving some signature requirements, allowing people to register just online without any ID, all sorts of stuff that we covered, all premised on COVID because it was so dangerous and deadly that we couldn't have them walking around out in public. Now, that being said, right, the midterms are not for quite some time away. So can't imagine that they're going to be able to extend the Delta hysteria into that. But we'll probably get Lambda or Kappa or Gamma or Beta, whatever the next Delta is going to be. We have Todd Trout in the house, says, Rob, what is the worst optic? Not wearing a mask on the House floor or the picture of showing handcuffs being put on a non-compliant House member? Call her bluff, which I think that's what they're doing right now. As I was getting ready for the show, I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw a lot of those images that they're sort of walking through Congress without any masks on. We have some other questions coming in. Let's see what we've got. Sergeant Bob is here, says, sorry, comment on Capitol Police is from Sergeant Bob. Oh, okay. So that was from Sergeant Bob. Oh, that's the second screen. That was from Sergeant Bob on the Capitol Police. Thank you for that, Sergeant Bob. Good to put a name to that one. Appreciate you being here. I'm Not Gas says, sorry, I've been gone for a while. Yeah, I know. I'm Not Gas. I know. I missed you. I'm glad you're back. Says, had to swing by Langley and Quantico for updates on the new trigger words for our field operatives. Well, that's good. That's good. So your field operatives, it's a dangerous world out there. You never know what's happening with a lot of the trigger words that are out there. It'd be a good list to know because we all got to be careful. We all got to be cognizant of that. All right, we got a couple more here on locals. The Darb says, I hope they arrest every single one of the Republicans in Congress. Maybe then they will finally get off their lazy bleeps and start actually doing what their voters sent them there for. Hashtag bums. They are bums. They're not doing anything meaningful. There's no, cohesion with the party. There's no message. There's no unification. They're not doing anything meaningful. Want to Know says, Governor Queen waited a few minutes after Biden and then announced all students shall have masks on this fall. Love those blue masks. Does she have a stock in the company? All the kids. Fauci's saying 2 years old, two-year-olds, wrap them up so that they can breathe their bodily waste as they're growing up. John Halgren says, as a frontline EMS fire employee, I can tell you this pandemic led to the slowest year of my career. Yep. But I guess nobody's really doing much of anything now. Right. So some industries were very, very suppressed in terms of activity. Others were extremely busy. Right. So like I know a nurse in California, or I'm sorry, not a nurse, a neurologist in California who was extremely busy because of all the COVID serotonin syndrome situations happening. Right. He was extremely busy, still extremely busy. So there's ebbs and flows all over the place. No Doubt is here, says, wasn't the original 14 days to slow the spread of voluntary initiative? Not here in Arizona. That was a executive order from the governor. Then the Democratic states were unhappy about it, didn't take enough control, and implemented the first lockdowns. Oh, I see what you're saying. Then the Republicans followed suit. Oh, okay, so I see what you're saying, No Doubt. Yeah, I don't know about that. I really don't know how that worked. I think here in Arizona, we didn't have any, voluntary lockdowns. I think that people started naturally locking down, and then it became official. Right. So there was actually a very interesting report from, there's a a restaurant app, I think called Open Table, where they were showing that people were stopping, were reducing their time going to restaurants already before the lockdowns happened, right? So people were locking down and sort of withdrawing from social life before the government ordered it. Interesting questions. Okay, a couple more, and then we're going to get to the super chats. Want to know says, maybe Kamala Biden weren't vaccinated. Maybe they should be wearing masks. Well, they said that they were vaccinated there, but I get your point. Three Girlies is here, says, hopefully people will start to wake up. The government can't be trusted. Founding fathers already knew that. That's why we have checks and balances. Yes, maybe it's time for the American people to hold their government officials accountable. Perhaps this was what was needed to wake Americans up to what's been going on for far too long. You know, I've been seeing a lot of that, and I've been seeing people, I spend too much time on Twitter. I talk about it a lot, but I get a lot of the content for the show from there, and I was seeing that there's a lot of sort of, anecdotal reports that even people who are pro-lockdown, pro-mask, big response from the government on coronavirus are getting tired of this. They're looking at a prospect of another lockdown, of putting masks on again, of keeping their kids out of school again as being very problematic, and they don't want to play that game anymore. All right, great questions from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Let's check out some of the super chats that came in. We say, we got that one already. Curtis Bartle was here, says, like I have always said, if you can smell an if you can smell an aerosolic excrement from somebody's rear end through a mask, it won't stop a virus. Yeah, because you can smell the excrement, the aerosolic excrement. We have another one, CDC equals Centers for Data Corruption. I've also heard it as the Center for Disease Confusion or for Data Confusion, right? That's another one. Oh, we got a birthday in the house. We have Jason Jackson. Happy birthday, Jason. Thanks for being here, and thanks for that super chat. And happy birthday to you, man. That's celebrate that. Birthdays come and go, and it's always good to celebrate another year of wisdom under your belt. Thanks for the support. Happy birthday to you. We also have Lava Java Lavas in the house. I haven't seen Lava Java Lava in a long time. Maybe they would get more people to take the vax if it got you high. Yeah, if there were some benefits over there. And then I said if there were some benefits over there, like getting high versus potentially saving your life, right? All right, LT13, last question on this segment says, let me tell you what kids do in masks at school. Snot in them, chew in them, lick them, wear them on their chins. Yeah, and they take their snot and they smear it all over each other. And so that's just how it's going to be. Great questions, great super chats. Thank you, everybody, for all of your love and support on that segment. Very much appreciated. All right, so we're going to move on. We've got another segment to get to here, and we're going to be talking about the elections, of course, the 2020 elections, because the DOJ is now out with a new report. But we got to be careful. We can't say that this changed the outcome, because that's a big no-no on YouTube. The U.S. Justice Department just came out, issued new guidance for all of those pesky states doing audits on the 2020 elections. The DOJ, being headed up by Merrick Garland, now announced that there's going to be some oversight. We have our eyeballs on you. States like Arizona, the states doing the audits. Let's take a look at what's happening here. Some people are viewing this as a warning, and we're going to give a shout out over here to AZ Central here in Arizona because we have a big audit going on right now. Now, we're not going to be talking about that specific audit, but just about these new guidelines, because the guidelines now, in my opinion, are out here to chill these. It's to stop these from going forward. It's to put a little bit of fear in the people who are promoting the audits or who are trying to encourage them to be done. It's for the senators, but it's also for the private companies that are doing these things. And specifically, I'm talking about companies like the Cyber Ninjas who have been doing these audits. The DOJ came out and said, we're watching you punks over there. If you think that we don't have eyeballs on you, you have another thing coming. And in fact, this could be something that is even criminal in nature if you screw up, if you cross that line. So the DOJ is really putting the spotlight down on a lot of these audit companies. Why? Probably so that they don't do audits anymore, right? Probably to chill that efforts. All right, so let's get back into it. Some background here before we jump right into the document itself. U.S. Justice Department on Wednesday issued new guidelines. Move came 3 months after Arizona Senate began its review here in our state. Guidance outlines federal laws that pertain to election audits and talks about chain of custody records and protocols. We're going to read the article. We're going to read the guidance. While the department described the documents as guidance, they also serve as a kind of warning about what the federal government will and will not tolerate as part of these reviews. The documents only mention Arizona's efforts once in passing, but they follow an earlier letter sent to the Arizona Senate that raised concerns about what's going on here. Merrick Garland, the new attorney general under Biden, said the right of all eligible citizens to vote is the central pillar of our democracy. Justice Department will use all the authorities to zealously guard that right. Okay, so before we dive into this, this is the document. This is what it looks like. It is the federal law constraints on post-election audits. Now, you see what they did here? They put audits in quotation marks. This little is very, very clever. They think they're very clever. Published July 28, 2021. And so they're going to say, oh, these so-called audits. You call it an audit. We call it audits here at the Justice Department, which is, a little bit rude, quite frankly, a little bit rude way to start off a memorandum. But we also have to keep in mind what's happening here. Remember, we've got a federal system of government. We have state governments. We have feds and localities. Now, back during the election, there were a lot of battles about that system. And we had a lot of problems with this in all of the preceding election litigation. So let me frame that out a little bit better. If you recall, there were a lot of changes that took place in the various states all throughout the country. We talked a lot about Pennsylvania. We talked a lot about North Carolina and many of the other states that sort of had some changes taking place before November 3rd, 2020. Specifically, Pennsylvania moved the election date back. North Carolina moved it back. We saw some other changes about how ballots can be collected, how people can register to vote, and what sort of signature requirements and what IDs need to be presented, and whether people can harvest ballots and things like that. Lots of questions that were all settled at the state level in the states. And when Trump and his people or the GOP tried to challenge these changes and they worked themselves up into the Supreme Court came back down and said, states, do whatever the hell you want to do. Don't get us involved. The Constitution says that the state legislature is the appropriate body to dictate what happens with the elections. And because the Constitution says it's the state legislature and the states are supposed to do that, if the judges are changing the rules or the executive branch is changing the rules because of COVID and they're making all of these exceptions, well, that's not the Supreme Court's problem. That's not the federal government's problem, is essentially what they said. They said, deal with it in your states. And if you recall, the state of Texas sued Pennsylvania, I think it was Pennsylvania, and along with 12 or 16 other attorneys general throughout the entire country, and said, hey, federal government, what you allowed Pennsylvania to do is impacting, it's not equal protection for our voting rights here in Texas. If Pennsylvania is allowed, hypothetically, to manipulate the votes and sort of, move things around and sort of seize power from the state legislature, take it into the court system, or in Georgia, allow the executive branch through the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to manipulate some of the underlying election rules. If you, Supreme Court, allow the states to do that, then they can manipulate their electoral results. And if that happens, then they can scam the election, essentially, right? They can move it around. Now, I'm not saying this is what happened, because it didn't. Joe Biden is the president, and we all love and thank that he's uniting America. But the point here is, hypothetically, if that happened, the Supreme Court now said specifically, we don't care about it. Texas, that's your problem. If you think that Pennsylvania is doing something that's not on the up and up, your problem. We're not going to get involved. And they declined certiorari for that case. They said, we don't want to hear the case. So now what happens? Well, now that Biden's in office, the federal government, through the executive branch, is saying, oh, now it's our business. Now it's our time to get involved in this stuff. And what the federal government is going to do through the Justice Department is criminalize the states that are now trying to conduct the audits, questioning the last election that had a lot of the rules changed by other actors in the state pre-November 3rd. Whew. All right, so there's a lot going on there. The point here, the feds are now interested again. Okay, so the Supreme Court, they were all telling us the states can do whatever the hell they want to do with their elections. Now, not anymore. Now, because they're up at the top, they're pulling the ladder up behind them, and they're saying, states, you're not allowed to go and investigate the preceding elections. Let's figure out what's going on here. Here is the document itself. We're not going to read the whole thing because it's a lot, but you'll notice that this is Joe Biden down here, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. So they're in cahoots. Let's get into the document. It says, U.S. Justice Department is committed to ensuring full compliance with all federal laws. Got it. Includes provision that govern the retention and preservation of election records. So we've got two things we're going to focus on. Number one, right here, the preservation and retention of election records. These are going to be process types of crimes. And then number two, we've got this right here, that basically intimidation. Any activities that cause intimidation, interference, or interfere with a person's right to vote, those are going to be where we're focused, these two sort of broad categories here. The department is also committed to ensuring that our elections are secure. Listen to this quote. This quote is from a joint statement from the Federal Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They said here, look, folks, this is an official government document, and this is in quotes. It said, the November 3rd election was the most secure in American history. Oh, well, there you go. Okay, we're going to wrap this section up early because they told us that it was the most secure in American history. So should we go to the chat? Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, just kidding, folks. In many jurisdictions, there were automatic recount or canvasses pursuant to state law due to the closeness of election results. None of those recounts produce evidence of wrongdoing or mistakes. Okay. And right, that's true, right? Perfectly legitimate election. In recent months, a number of jurisdictions around the U.S., an unusual second round of examinations have been conducted. They look at certain ballots, election records, election systems used to conduct the elections in 2020. These examinations are sometimes referred to as, quote, audits. They are governed, they say, under federal law. In some circumstances, certain exemptions may apply, others they will not. But regardless of the state law, federal law now imposes additional restraints. This document provides information about those restraints. Okay, so it's saying you can do those audits, but not if they are out of alignment with federal law. And federal law is saying, according to Merrick Garland, that we're going to be focused on these two big buckets. When we're watching you cyber ninjas, when we're watching any of you other auditors, we know that you're poking around here to come in and sort of investigate what went on. If you do that, we are going to be scrutinizing all of your efforts for two things. Number one, process problems. If there are procedural problems with what you're doing, specifically if you're not holding on to data. We talk a lot about chain of custody on this show, right? Person A gives it to person B. Person B gives it to person C. C to D, D to E, E to F. F gives it back to A. It's all verified and validated. If that chain is broken, well, you might have a problem. You can't really trust the integrity of that evidence because if A gave it to C, or sorry, if C got it and he got it from B and A gave it to B, but B is missing, well, we got questions about what B did with that evidence, and we can't ask him about it because they're not in the chain. So we've got that, process problems. And what the government is going to be saying, if there are any process problems, well, you're responsible for those. Secretary of State from Arizona, if you give those over to that agency and something happens there, you're responsible for it. And that's just number one. Number two is if as a part of your audits, you are intimidating people, you're scaring them, if you're doing something that might cross over that federal statute against voter intimidation or anything that even resembles that, well, in doing your audit, your quote audit, you may be committing crimes and you're going to be responsible for that, according to the Biden DOJ. So let's dig into this. Where does this power come from? Where does the authority to govern all of this come from? You can see here, it comes from the Civil Rights Act of 1960, according to Garland. He says, this pertains to retain and preserve all records relating to voting, right? Section 301 of the act. So he goes in and identifies it. He says here, they got to hold on to those records for 22 months after the conduct of any election, including president. The materials covered by 301 goes beyond papers, includes other records. Jurisdictions then must retain and preserve the records. And if you don't, going to be a problem. So he goes through and he gives us a lot of other legal justifications, underpinnings for why this is allowable under the Department of Justice. And then we get to a conclusion a little bit. He gives us the basis. This is where we draw our authority. It's from the Civil Rights Acts and other things. And therefore, we get a conclusion. We get some analysis from him. He says, therefore, if the original election official, okay, so the person like the Secretary of State, the person who's in charge of running your state election, if they have custody of the records and they're covered by the act, and they hand those records over to other election officials, for example, to legislatures or other office holders, or the official turns over the records to private parties, such as companies that offer forensic examinations, right? This would be like cyber ninjas. So here, if the Arizona Secretary of State gives it over to another government official, or if they give it over to a private party, the department, the Justice Department, the department that's responsible for prosecuting crimes and putting people in prison and jail, interprets the act to require that if that happens, administrative procedures be in place, giving election officers ultimate management authority over the retention, including the right to physically access such records. In other words, the obligation to retain and preserve election records remains intact, regardless of who has physical possession of those records. What that means, folks, the Secretary of State, if they give those records over to anybody else, they're still responsible. Okay, so if they're transferring those things around, they've got to make sure that every single person who's touching those records is maintaining these obligations, right? They're comporting with the law. What does that do practically speaking? It encourages any election officials to not share anything, to not give it out to anybody. No, you can't see it. Why? Because if you do, if I give you these records and you screw it up, I'm in trouble. So how about I just don't give you anything? It chills the entire investigative process, and they know that's what's happening. That's why they're doing it. It's a procedural thing, right? Bury them in process work, make it almost impossible for them to actually process through the audits, because all of the record keeping has to be so robust that every handoff needs to be checked and monitored, right? And so now, I'm not saying that these audit companies can't do that, or even that that's a bad policy, but what's happening is that if they have to comply with those sort of regulations, certain people in this country they're already, not wanting to do audits, or not, wanting to sort of get that whole issue behind them. They're certainly not going to do it now if they know that the Justice Department is breathing down their necks. All right, so what else do we have? There are also federal criminal penalties that are attached to willful failures to comply. COVID crimes. Here you go, folks. We're straight out of the Justice Department. We got it in the Congressional building, and now we have it right out of the DOJ. There are federal criminal penalties attached to willful failures to comply with, and this is that was for COVID. This is for voting stuff, but we're criminalizing stuff all over the place. Failure to comply with the retention and preservation requirements of the Civil Rights Act. Criminal penalties. First, Section 301 makes it a federal crime to willfully fail to comply with retention. 302 says any person, whether or not an officer, who steals, destroys, conceals, mutilates, or alters any record is also subject to criminal penalties. So conceals, mutilates, right? Violators of either section can face a $100,000 fine and imprisonment of up to 1 year. Look at this. For each violation. See that? For each violation. So the question then becomes, is it for each, let's say, batch of votes? Or is it for each individual vote? So what happens if you're analyzing, 2 million votes? And you got 2 million violations. Then you got a $2 million fine, and also 2 million years in prison. So that's what the Justice Department is bringing down. Now, they give us some notes here. They say election audits are exceedingly rare, but the department is concerned that some jurisdictions, shout out Arizona, may be conducting them using or proposing to use procedures that risk violating the Civil Rights Act. Nobody wants to violate the Civil Rights Act. The duty to retain and preserve records necessarily means that they've got to maintain the chain of custody so there is a complete record. Election records are no longer... Okay, so this is the rest of the election record section. The second big bucket that I was talking about is this one here, intimidation. Okay, so the first one, of course, process problems. Now this says, this is going to be a violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 if you are doing something that is intimidation-like. What does intimidation mean? We get some guidance here from the U.S. Code. Knowingly, willfully, threaten, coerce, attempt to intimidate any person for any reason, right? So let's go into this a little bit more. It says the Attorney General can file civil actions to stop this, but there are also criminal penalties as well. So if you're doing, voter intimidation, boom, more criminal charges for that. So now if you're, wanting to audit this stuff, you're exposing yourself to a lot of criminal liability. Let's see what else is happening here. Judicial decisions have established that voter intimidation doesn't even need to involve physical threats. Now we need to know what intimidation actually means. In certain contexts, it could mean adverse social consequences, adverse legal consequences. Those can also be impermissible threats. So we have a couple examples here. And so the question is, as we're going through this analysis, are these audits voter intimidation, right? Because voter intimidation, we know, is illegal. It can be a civil rights, a civil claim brought under the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act, but it can also have criminal penalties attached to it. So are the audits voter intimidation? Well, let's see. They're going to give us some guidance and they're going to tell us how some of this works. We have some examples from prior case law. This case comes from the Ninth Circuit, sending a letter to foreign-born Latino registered voters, warning them that if they voted, their information would be collected. That is intimidation, right? They're being connected to that. We have having police officers from the Fifth Circuit write down license plate numbers. That's enough to be intimidation, right? License plate numbers. That's intimidation. We also have sending robocalls, asking if they voted by mail. That could become part of a public database. That could constitute intimidation. Linking individuals to illegalities in a way that might trigger harassment could constitute intimidation. To illegalities, see that? Linking individual voters to allegations of illegalities might trigger harassment. That could also be intimidation. And how about conducting a ballot, quote, ballot security program where defendants stand near Native American voters to discuss whether they've been prosecuted? That could also be voter intimidation. So the question then, if we do the compare and contrast, if we say, hey, we know that the Fifth Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, South Dakota, West Virginia, many of these other states have said that this is what intimidation is. What the heck are they talking about? How does this apply to any audits that are taking place? How is that intimidation? Well, they give us some guidance on that. They say there have been reports, with respect to some of the post-2020 ballot examinations of proposals to contact individuals face-to-face to see whether the individuals were qualified voters who had actually voted. Cyber Ninja's statement of work, proposing to select 3 precincts in a large urban county to collect information from individuals through, quote, a combination of phone calls and physical canvassing. Guess what that was? Do you remember when Matt Brainard was calling all of the people and asking them if they still lived at that address and if they voted? He did that for tens of thousands of people, if I'm not mistaken, back in the immediate aftermath of the November 3rd election. Calling everybody, going through all of this data, phone banking. He raised, I think, $1 million or whatever to do this work. That would probably constitute harassment. He's actually now going out. Hang on a second. So, all right. So this sort of activity, let me just go back to this thing here. I want to finish this before we move on. This sort of activity raises concerns regarding potential intimidation of voters. For example, when these efforts are directed or perceived to be directed at minority voters or minority communities, they have significant intimidating effect on qualified voters. So there's a comment. So Matt Brainard and Cyber Ninjas or anybody that wants to sort of go and confirm and sort of, audit and test. Hey, do you still live there? Did you vote here? Did you vote by mail? Yes or no? All of those questions might be harassment. So you can't do those things anymore. According to the DOJ, jurisdictions that authorize or conduct audits must ensure that those reviews are conducted that with neither the purpose nor the effect of dissuading qualified citizens for participating in the electoral process. If they do not, the department will act to ensure that all eligible citizens feel safe. All right, if you have questions, give us a call. Also, if you have been subject to intimidation, you can use this complaint form. Give us a call. And we'll go prosecute whoever is intimidating you. Wow. So election audits are basically illegal now. That is from the Biden DOJ. All right. Well, so we know that Joe Biden won the last election, so we can't talk about anything that questions that, as we know. But we are going to go into the questions. And so let's take a look at what is coming in over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right. First one here is from Kincaid. It says, Rob, Is there not a way to consolidate matters related to voting and audits? I mean, the legal system has not really allowed evidence to be shown. How can professionals keep a straight face? They know the difference between a resolution versus resolve. Framers accounted for tyranny and corruption. Why are not court officials speaking plainly for justice? I have a sinking feeling something larger than party disputes is playing out. Thank you for all the guidance and hard work. Thank you. Very nice comment, Kincaid. Thank you for that. You know, my opinion on this hasn't really changed. And I think that the courts are still extremely reluctant to get involved in the electoral process. They don't want to be seen as being the arbiter of those things. And there's a long tradition here in law for some of this, that they just won't even address what are called political questions. So if you look into law and you look into constitutional jurisprudence, there's some types of cases that just won't ever make their way into court. And there are certain reasons why. One, well, the case is moot, right? You're filing a lawsuit, but the issue has already been resolved and it's moot. And so there are rules that say, well, if it's a moot case and it's not going to come back again, we're not going to hear the case. And so it's essentially a standing rejection of the case. There's no standing to bring the case in. You can also have ripeness, right? You're suing about something that's not ripe yet. It's not a problem yet. I know it's coming, but it's not ripe yet. It's not a problem yet. There are other questions that courts will just eject from the judicial process by calling it a political question. It's another standing sort of exception. They say, no, we're not going to hear the case. It's a political question. Go talk to your legislature about that. Go talk to your representative about that. And if you don't like their answer, vote them out. And then they're the ones that get to come in here and settle that, right? Even when we were talking about the 2020 election litigation, I was never anybody who said that I expected a judge to throw out 7 million votes or something like that. It was never going to happen because it was too much of an ask. There would have to be something catastrophically egregious for a court to come out here and say, we're going to take the entire constituency, all of your votes, and throw them out. And the courts, the judges are just not willing to do that. There's too much to... the Titanic is going one direction. It is not possible to reorient that without some serious data showing that it's impossible to deny it. And so that's what people are waiting for with some of these audits. We'll see what happens. We have It's Ed says, Rob, loving the show. Always look forward to it. Me too, Ed. I'm glad you're here. Says, so doesn't the Constitution outline the rights of the states to oversee their own elections? Yes, it does, including audits, at least. I thought the Supreme Court stated that regarding Pennsylvania. You did, Ed. You're on the right track. It's exactly right, which is what you have sort of the same, you're identifying the same contradiction that I am. It's that the feds said that the states should be allowed to change whatever they want because it's the states that get to govern their elections. That was when they wanted the rules their way so that they could unseat Donald Trump and put Joe Biden in. Now that Joe Biden's in, well, now it's okay if the feds come in and make sure that the states don't get too squirrely. When they were squirrely on behalf of the Democrats, that was A-okay. No problems at all. But now if it's getting squirrely on behalf of the Republicans, the DOJ has to come in here and step in, because that's the wrong kind of squirrely. It's not good enough. We have some other ones coming in from Want to Know. Says, Rob, I will testify that you have not mentioned anything about state review that Billy Jack was filmed in, except that which was already approved by CNN. Karen has a Twitter account too. I don't know what you're talking. Who's Billy Jack? I don't know what you're talking about. Want to Know. Good to see you. We have I'm Not Gas says, how do the feds have any say in state-run audits? Well, they're basing it on the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. I may not be a failed Supreme Court candidate like Garland, but my cursory reading of the Constitution says the state have precedent on election issues. Yeah, I know. And the U.S. federal government comes out and says, no, we're supreme now, and we'll see if the courts do anything about it. I agree with you. I read the same dang provision in the Constitution that you did too. I'm Not Gas. And it is perplexing. All right, let's see what we got. Some super chats. Let's make sure we don't miss these before they go away. We got Beth Coddington with a very generous super chat. Let's pull that up. Beth, thank you for that. Beth says, hey, Robert, a bit off topic, but did you see 4 of the congressional overseers have tried to get into the D.C. prison where the January 6 prisoners were kept? First, they were told they were trespassing. Then they were locked out. I'll post on Locals. Awesome. Thank you, Beth. So I did see that. I saw that Matt Gaetz, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene, and several others went over there. And it was right as I was coming onto the show. So I didn't spend much time looking into it. a lot of those things I think are political spectacles, right? I got to be consistent on that. Anytime these politicians do these, spectacle ops, it is that. That doesn't take away from the issue, okay? The January 6th defendants are political prisoners. We've talked about this a lot on this channel, talked about the total unequal protection, the lack of due process that they are being afforded. And I've shown you the documents on this show. There are still people out there that are denying that, and we have the documents, and you can compare and contrast between what the Kavanaugh protesters got, between what Antifa or BLM people got. Even the people who burnt down the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis are sort of working their way through the system with less of horrendous conditions than the January 6th defendant. So you're absolutely right, Beth Coddington. I'm going to look at that story. Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and a lot of them, they are showmen in the same way that AOC is or that Cori Bush is. And so it's just not my particular brand of politics. I don't know how effective it is, but I understand that it is very, very compelling. It's entertaining, and that's why they're very popular, right? They've got a lot of followers and a lot of heft out there in their respective positions. Good to see you. I'm not gassed. We got a couple more. Sergeant Bob says, thank God Garland did not become a Supreme Court justice. Could have been around forever, but now at least he can hopefully be rid of him in 2024. It's a great point, Sergeant Bob. He was pretty close. They almost squeaked that one through, but McConnell saved that, didn't he? We have Thunder7 says, hey, Rob, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, other reps went down. Yeah, got that. They were refused to visit, actually locked out. They gave a short press conference, said they'd never been refused visitation before. One was a retired judge. Is this illegal? So I don't know. So, I wish I would have spent a little bit more time on this story. It's hard for me to comment on it when I just saw it. Like, I think they were walking in when I was finishing my prep here. So I don't know the full story, so I don't want to comment on it right now. But it sort of depends, right? It depends on how they were approaching this. Like, if they say, hey, let me in and go see the prisoners, then that's probably not going to be kosher, right? This is a prison. They've got all sorts of security protocols. I don't know what a congressperson, if they've got any, fast passes through security, but even for a defense lawyer, we got to jump through a bunch of hoops to get into a prison. I mean, we got to, do a bunch of stuff that's not worth getting into, but it's a high security, process. Okay. We have Moose in the House says, states need to stand up and say the Constitution gives control of elections to state legislatures. If states can do whatever they want per SCOTUS, lack of willingness to rule on state actions, then the Fed cannot exercise any control over the audits. To be consistent, SCOTUS must agree that states can perform audits as they see fit. Which states are going to stand up? Moose in the House with a great comment, very good comment. And that's exactly right. Right. And that's the consistency that I was trying to articulate, but you did a better job of it to me, right? It's consistency. Either it's the state's business or it's not. Pick one. They've already said it's a state business. So, the state should be free to conduct their audits as they see fit. Another one from Ghost of Lee Harvey Oswald. Ooh, spooky. Says, just wondering, do politicians still do motorcades? I can't read. Okay. All right. We have, let's jump over to Let's jump over to YouTube and see what's going on here. We've got C. Reed is in the house, says, make 1984 fiction again. Thank you, C. Reed, for that. It's a little too close to home. We have Chris Wolney says, if audits are rare, how rare are certified auditors? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. Angela B. says, so all of the Democrat and Rhino secretaries of state that have admittedly lost and misplaced 2020 election records are all facing prosecution? It's a great point, Angela B. It'd be a good question, right? And we know we have that 22-month deadline. So maybe all of the Republican pro auditors in their states should start auditing, or at least request that. Hey, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, where are all those records? Where are they? Oh, you don't have them? Hey, Attorney General Merrick Garland, here's a copy of your guidance, your memorandum, and here's the name of the person who violated the rules. Why don't you go and charge them criminally? How about that? All right, good thought there, Angela B. We have Eddie Oliver says, could that same intimidation law apply to IRS audits? That would be cool. Yeah, so I think you're saying if an IRS agent calls you and they harass you, they get 1 year in prison and $1,000 fine. I support that. Yeah, I support that law. Kelly Ayers is here, says, so now the Dems are concerned with the handling of ballots, right? What an oxymoron. Time for this to stop. Every single Dem connected to the election fiasco should be in jail. One can only dream. Take a minute to picture free and fair elections. Well, they said we had that already. So I guess if we had that, then there will be no repercussions for anybody. Unless you're doing the audits. There are no election consequences unless you're doing the audits. Then it is a problem. All right, we got another one from Super Iron Bob just popped in, said, I hear poachers are having legal problems in Africa. Can we bring some in for our rhino problem? I'm sure they would make great election consultants. Oh, okay, let's go. Thank you for that, Super Iron Bob. All right, let's fly through a couple of additional form questions, and then what time we got? Let's see what else is here. All right, Legal Panda is here. Says Texas didn't state direct harm to the state of Texas. They laid out a bunch of hypothetical, which is of course true, but wasn't the point of the lawsuit. They forgot to connect what was alleged in the lawsuit to the hypothetical harm. By that, I mean, they didn't link word by word. I actually thought it was a very beginner mistake by Texas. I even saw it instantly what the problem was. So sad. That's from Legal Panda. And Legal Panda is I think you're onto something there, right? A lot of these lawsuits were missing a lot of that. Connecting, but they were all basically dismissed on standing issues. And part of the reason for that is because there was some sloppiness in connecting the dots. Not all of them, and I don't recall the Texas lawsuit specifically, but there were some others out of Nevada and some other states that I was reading, and I was saying, well, that's gonna go away because they're not, the person filing the lawsuit is not the person actually harmed. We have Interior Architect Panda says studio is looking much nicer. Thank you for that. I'm working on it and getting it cleaned up a little bit. Got to hang the sign on the wall and some other things. Jeremy is here with a nice one. Says, Rob, the Constitution, 10th Amendment says powers not delegated to the U.S. nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states or to the people. Contrary to popular belief, the states have authority over themselves. Federal government does not have power over elections. Federal government needs to be reminded that a government by the people, of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Anything else will not stand. Love it. Thank you for that, Jeremy. Yeah, it's a good reminder, right? We often forget the federal government is not life. They're not. They want to be. They want to control everything, but they're not our lives. The states reserve a ton of power in this country, and we want to make sure we protect it. Got some other super chats coming in. Says, it was already state to state. Why fix wasn't broken? Good grief. Dems are selfish. That's from Lauren S. Yeah, state by states. We saw a lot of changes in many different states. And if you've been with the channel for some time, we were covering them before the election. We were going through and saying this lawsuit was won, this lawsuit was won, this lawsuit was lost, and so on. Bonnie Speck says, wherever rules Dems put in place will bite them later, like doing away with the filibuster. Yep. So they changed the rules to suit them, right? Get to the roof and pull the ladder up so nobody else can get up behind you. And then Manners says, Rob, can you explain how far one can go without being considered an insurrectionist? As in, is liberty or death a crime to believe or say? Are Jefferson quotes? You know, it's a great question, and it's a very interesting question because we are seeing certain people in this country talk about anti-government rhetoric as being insurrectionist or as being language that domestic terrorists use or the domestic violent extremist, right? Maybe you're not a terrorist yet. That's kind of a serious category. Maybe you're just a domestic violent extremist. And a lot of that language, things like Jefferson, things like saying, well, the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and the, however the rest of that goes. Those phrases might be problematic, a little bit scary. And it is something that's we've got to deal with, don't we? All right, we got some other questions coming in. I got to pick up the pace a little bit because we still have a whole segment. So let me take that one super chat. I think two came in. Another one came in from Zulu. Says, could latches apply even if they don't file against audit fraud before the results are released? Could latches apply if they don't file against audit fraud before the results are... So I think you're asking, Zulu, if the feds... I apologize, Zulu. I'm not sure what you're asking. I think you're asking if the feds file against the, like cyber ninjas, for example, if the feds filed against them before the results are released, could they use latches to keep the results from coming out? I think that's what you're asking, and I think the answer would be yes, right? And I think that a judge would very likely find in that way, because this is now the new guidance from the Department of Justice. So it's a great question. So they could actually, theoretically go after now on this basis, saying, hey, this is how we're interpreting the laws. This is guidance for you. And so, if you continue to do this investigation, we are going to file a criminal complaint against you, and that would subject you to seizure of all of your work product, essentially, right? Anything that you got in violation of the law would be subject to confiscation and be impounded as evidence. And so maybe you could really actually shatter the perceived legitimacy of the underlying audit by doing that, right? Because you can kind of go in there and interfere with their audit that's taking place right now, allegedly, according to them, in this sort of closed door environment, right? The reason why people have problems with the audit investigations taking place is because everybody is saying that every part of the investigation is compromising the evidence. When the auditors want to come and get the official documents from the custody of Arizona or whatever state is doing the audit, well, they got to take custody of that, which breaches the chain of custody. And so anybody who doesn't want the audits to move forward starts to scream foul, right? Foul game on that, because now you broke that. And so now what the auditors would do, if the DOJ comes in and interferes with that line of investigation as well, then they'll say, well, you breached our protected environment and you're breaching our chain of custody. And so they may say that, the results that they were intending to report are going to be different, are different now because the DOJ sees some evidence. But I see what you're getting at, that this might be sort of a wedge in order to start legal proceedings towards the cyber ninjas on the basis that the new interpretation of the rules pursuant to the guidance justifies criminal complaints being filed. It's a great point, great question, Zulu. And we'll see where that goes. Maybe that's what they're doing. Good observation on that. All right, great questions. Thank you for all of those and all of your love and support, both on Locals and on YouTube. I appreciate you all very, very much. Okay, we've got one final segment, then we're going to wrap it up for the day. Been talking a lot about infrastructure, and now it sounds like we might be getting pretty close to this. Now, if you're like me, you may be somebody who is looking at all of the other spending bills, like $900 billion here, another $1 trillion over there. I can't even keep count anymore. But we have been spending money over the last 2 years or so in this country to respond to the coronavirus, hand over fist. And when it looked like sort of the country was emerging from this, many people were expecting a lot of the spending and the infrastructure to stop. That has not been the case. In fact, it's sort of escalated. And Joe Biden sort of been struggling on some other policy issues like immigration and the G7 and like the teleprompter and things like that. Difficult. But he's also now moving forward with some infrastructure progress. So we've got two things to talk about in the infrastructure category. One, not so good, about the eviction ban, which is now ending at the end of this month, and the Biden administration is scrambling to get this thing solved. So that's kind of not good. But then Biden is moving forward, if you're pro-Biden and pro-infrastructure. Sounds like he's got a bipartisan agreement with a bunch of senators who are also in alignment to continue to spend America into oblivion. So we're going to start off, get the bad news out of the way if you're pro-Biden. The evictions thing is problematic. Now, Bloomberg is telling us that Biden suddenly is urging an extension of the eviction ban, and only days before it ends, right? Only days before it ends. This came out July 29th by Nancy Cook over at Bloomberg. It says President Joe Biden urged Congress to extend a moratorium on home evictions just 2 days before it's set to expire, after the pandemic took a turn for the worse and economic growth in the second quarter missed forecasts, right? And so when I first read this headline, I was thinking, well, did he just forget about evictions expiring at the end of this month? It's 2 days and he's going to Congress. Look at these subheadlines here. 7.4 million Americans are behind on rent, according to the Census Bureau. Supreme Court previously limited Biden's ability to impose moratorium on the evictions. So you're thinking, okay, if you're the president and you know that at the end of the month, 7.4 million people who are behind on rent are going to have eviction proceedings started against them or their families, that you would be a little bit ahead of the game. You wouldn't actually be, 2 days before the eviction things scrambles, go, oh shoot, is that Friday? Are you serious? get Nancy on the phone. I totally forgot about that. Is there anything we can do? Can they ship it priority? So he goes to Congress now. Now, the real reason, right, might be because economic growth is terrible in the second quarter, missed forecast. So now he's saying, oh, well, if it would have been great, then we could have kicked all those people out. But it's not great. So I guess we're going to need an extension. President calls on Congress to extend the eviction moratorium to protect vulnerable renters and their families. Biden also asked the Department of Housing and Urban Development to extend the eviction through the end of September. Living in federally assured houses, right? In recent days, Democratic lawmakers and housing advocates have called for extending the moratorium beyond July 21, but it isn't clear that Congress can act in time, even if there's enough political support for an extension. Last minute scrambling, 7.4 million people. Congress is now doing cartwheels to try to get something done. Here's a guess: they won't. So not a big positive there for those 7.4 million families who have been incentivized to rely on the government. The government has just been, here you go, here, take some more, here, take some more, here, take some more. And then suddenly, oh, we're taking that all back. And then 2 days before, they say, oh, well, we're going to ask for an extension. That's not going to get done. So more uselessness from the federal government that's causing people more hardship than they would have experienced had the government not got involved in the first place and not imposed all these lockdowns and business-wrecking policies. Okay, but if you are pro-Biden now and you're very excited about spending another $1 trillion, today's a good day for you. You're pretty excited about this because there is a bipartisan infrastructure plan that is now coming to agreement. The Senate voted 67-32 on Wednesday to begin debate on the roughly $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure plan. 57-page summary, so we're going to look at it. $550 billion in new federal investments over 5 years. $2.2 trillion proposal was what Joe Biden wanted. Unveiled that in March. That was called the American Jobs Plan. Money for roads and all of that other stuff, but he's only going to get $1 trillion. Still happy with that. Says still makes key investments to put people to work all across the country. All right, so let's take a look at the summary. This is the summary sheet. Biden Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act summary. A road to stronger economic growth. Okay. Let's take a look at the table of contents. What is in here? We're going to take a quick look at the top line summary, and we're going to skim through a couple of these other things. Just want to show you what's in here. Roads, bridges, major projects, passenger and freight rail. We have public transit, safety and research, airports, ports, waterways, broadband, especially for rural communities. Power infrastructure, Senate energy and natural resources, energy infrastructure, dam safety, tax credits. We got resiliency. We have cyber, wildfire management, ecosystems, drought, waste management, brick, flood mitigation, low, no carbon buses and ferries. Okay. State and tribal assistant for brownfields, remedial super fund, whatever that is. And then we've got an infrastructure framework, permitting provisions, and there it is at the bottom, cryptocurrencies. So this is going to be a lot of infrastructure for a lot of different things, as we can see here. Now, top line summary says what is happening here. The bullet points: no tax hikes on everyday Americans. So I don't know what that means, what everyday Americans means, but okay. So I guess they're going to tax the rich. So okay, historic investment in the nation's core infrastructure priority. So roads, bridges, all that stuff. Bipartisan Senate passed Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act. Reauthorization bills. We've talked about water, right? I think water is going to be a big problem. I made a video on this channel about the water wars that are coming soon, I believe. Improves permitting by including enhancements on Fast 41, rural infrastructure, long-term spending for capital assets, and also it says, listen to this, long-term spending for capital assets that will improve economic efficiency, productivity, GDP, and revenue, and will not increase inflation. So long-term spending of money that we don't have by just essentially printing money and adding it to the money supply, that's going to be spent on improving economic efficiency and then not increase inflation. So this is like a magical money. I don't know where it comes from, but maybe a Harry Potter movie or something. I don't know. New spending is paid for with CBO, JTC scores, and OMB estimates, all that stuff. All right, what's in here? $550 billion over 5 years. Commerce, we have repair bridges, increase funding for competitive grants, passenger and freight rail, $66 billion here, more funding for freight rail, safety at high railway grade crossings. All right, $11 billion to fund highway and pedestrian safety programs. So For people crossing the street, $11 billion to make sure they get across, I guess, safely, including significant investment in a safe streets program that prevents death and serious injury on roads and streets. So probably like an educational course on looking both ways. Oh, there's a car. It's going to hit me. Don't cross it. Okay, $11 billion. That sounds good. Public transit, another $39 billion. What's that going to get? 24,000 buses, 5,000 rail cars, 200 stations, broadband, especially for, poor minorities in rural areas because they have a very difficult time, according to this administration, not to me, getting on the internet. So that'll be good. $65 billion to help them get online. That's good. Ports and waterways, $17.3 billion for more ports. Airports, another $25 billion so that you continue to not travel because of all the stupid restrictions. Water infrastructure, $55 billion. Power grid, $73 billion. Maybe we'll be able to keep the electricity on around the country. That'd be nice. Resiliency for cybersecurity, $46 billion. I just can't get over the numbers. I mean, it's like going to the grocery store, Oh, how much does that mean? Oh, $46 billion. Okay. Low carbon, zero emission schools and buses, $7.5 billion. Now, this stuff is interesting because AOC and Cori Bush, they are unhappy about this. They are not happy with this program entirely, which is strange because we have low carbon, zero emission stuff, and they're both very happy about that. So $15 billion for, I guess, 2 sets of buses and ferries, one that's going to be low carbon and zero emission, one that's going to be EV and low carbon. So we're going to have a lot of school buses that probably don't work, that are electric vehicles, low carbon, $15 billion going to who knows who to build these useless vehicles that will probably not do anything useful. All right, new spending, pay-fors, $250 billion for repurposing unused COVID relief dollars. So they just passed so much stinking money that the money is just being reallocated because they weren't thinking. Funding from recouping fraudulently paid for benefits, $49 billion from delaying Medicare Part D, $53 billion from states returning unused federal funds, $20 billion from future spectrum auctions, and on and on and on. Okay, where's the money coming from? So they're pulling it from other resources, it sounds like. Here is the last section. Cryptocurrencies, if you're investing in crypto, this new infrastructure bill is going to change some of the reporting rules. So you're going to have to comply now with reporting any transactions or digital assets that are over $10,000. Of course, this is not financial advice or legal advice, but you can see the bipartisan framework is going to apply information reporting requirements over to digital assets, including cryptocurrency. So you can see that there. Now, who is responsible for this? The usual suspects. Let's see what Republicans were on board. We got Mitt Romney, of course. He's always on these things. Senator Graham, of course. Susan Collins, squishy right in the middle of the road. Lisa Murkowski as well. Kirsten Sinema, a little bit of a surprise. She's a Democrat, but she's in Arizona, and she was very unhappy with the $2.3 trillion bill, but she signed off on this one because it's kind of a discount. Senator Richard Burr, another Republican. Bill Cassidy, Republican. Jerry Moran, also here, Rob Portman, Tom Tillis, and the other sort of usual suspects, and Todd Young. Okay, so those are the Republicans. Now, you'll notice here that this crowd looks awfully Caucasian, doesn't it? Well, if you notice that, you're in good company because AOC noticed that as well. She says, hey, good luck taking your own party's investment on childcare, idiots, climate action and infrastructure, while presuming you'll survive a 3-vote House margin, especially after choosing to exclude members of color from negotiations and calling that a bipartisan accomplishment. Uh-oh. Members of color were excluded from this whole thing. Bipartisan racial exclusion happening in Congress with the Democrats. It's their Congress. Wow. Very racist. Well, AOC's onto something. Says a lot of times bipartisan agreements are just defined by people in power who agree to exclude rather than include. Oh, man. It's a racist bill, clearly. We have this here from Cori Bush also saying these Democrats are racist. Is this bipartisan infrastructure group the audience at a Kid Rock concert? Negotiations so white. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, folks, there you have it. Well, the Democrats are just racist. I can't. AOC said it. Cori Bush said it. I don't know what else to say about it. So, all right, let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com before we wrap up the show for the day. Let's see what we've got here. Let me cue some of these up over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Those are old questions. All right, here we go. The Congressional Mask War says Prescott and Fan. So we're going to go over to the next one. We have Sweet Potato says, can the Supreme Court weigh in on masks, or can L&I require masks for all time? Well, I think the Supreme Court could certainly weigh in on it. You know, I don't know where what their position on it would be, but they've already said you have to buy health care. They've already said that the government can basically force you to stay in your homes. So why can't they tell you to wear a mask at this point? I'm Not Gas says the eviction moratorium does nothing but benefit institutional investors. Mom and pop landlords do not have the capital and cannot secure the loans to keep their properties afloat while they deal with non-paying tenants and are forced to foreclose or sell to bad actors like BlackRock. This is facilitating more wealth transfer from the middle class to the banks. From I'm Not Gas. Yeah, it is. And it's creating more people who are just going to be compliant. If the eviction moratorium is extended, is it ever going to end? Is it ever going to end? Literally. I don't know. Maybe not. We have another one here says, want to know, says, when is the free money going to run out to all the Democratic districts? Heard AOC is winning, wants more free money. Only negotiating was between AOC and Kamala. We have Sergeant Bob says, mass transit works in dense European cities. In most of America, not so much. Yeah, because we have an entirely different geographic country, don't we, Sergeant Bob? But they like to pretend that we don't, because they're not often thinking all that much. Okay, we have Lorenzo Greasy Bottoms is in the house, says, what's all this low carbon nonsense? Don't they know they're going to destroy each other before climate change ever has a chance to? I thought the world was over. Didn't Al Gore say we only had 10 years like 12 years ago? I thought we were all supposed to be dead already, and we're not. I'm Not Gas says AOC be like, I just called you all racist. Why won't you invite me to your parties anymore? Hashtag racist. Oh my gosh. She's an actual congressperson. We have Peely Wally says, hey, Rob, off topic. Just wanted to say I missed live streams on yesterday. Watched it back today. What a great stream it was. You always put on a great show. The illegal alien segment was unbelievable. I send all Americans my best wishes. Thank you, Peely Wally. I appreciate that, my friend. Thanks for watching it and for being a part of the show. Great comments. You know, I appreciate all the feedback. I have a ton of fun, and it's really rewarding to be able to spend time with you here together. And I'm not just saying that. I really mean it. I really do enjoy it. All right, we had another super chat come in. This one's coming in from Abby the Barber. It says, old question. Why are the Dems are pro-choice, life on abortion, but not on vaccine? How is it different? It's a good question. And you know, this has been an interesting conversation, because people will say, well, you have to get the vaccine. So, you know, your body is sort of your choice if you want to go and have an abortion. But your body is not your choice if you want to take a vaccine. And the argument has always been, well, because if you don't take the vaccine and you catch COVID, then you could be infecting somebody else, which might kill them. In other words, if you don't get vaccinated, you might kill another person. And that is wrong. And then they say, well, I'm just going to go get an abortion and just, sort of take this fetus out of me and just get rid of it. And they don't see the equivalency there. And so it's a little bit confusing. And so I sort of agree with you on that one. So how is it different? One is, I guess, useful. Both of them are useful to them based on what they're trying to achieve. There's no logical consistency there, but that's okay. They don't need that. Lil Panda Cub sent over a little panda. Let's see if that pulls up. I don't think that it doesn't see the little panda, but I can see it, little Panda Cub. Thank you for sending that over. And that, my friends, I believe that's it for the day. Let's make sure that, we got one more coming in here from Hunter Biden. Going to wrap up the show from Hunter. Says, hey, Dad let me in on the new infrastructure deal, made me director. Love being the director of Burisma. Half the money spent, totally sent to your buddy's dad. So Hunter Biden's here. Hunter Biden's pretty excited about this infrastructure deal. I didn't see it in there, but there's probably a section in there that's going to be sending, $45 billion over to whatever Hunter Biden's working on. Oh, my goodness. All right. Thank you, Hunter. Thanks, Hunter. I'm glad Hunter's here. Nancy Pelosi was here. We had many people part of the Biden administration here. And we had a couple other super chats just come in before we wrap up for the day. Says, from Adam McLean, says, can Arizona 5's congressman be recalled to flip the House? Can Arizona's 5 congressmen be recalled to flip the House? Oh, I see what you're saying. I can't really speak to that, honestly. I don't know what the recall rules are in Arizona. It's a great question. I understand what you're asking, and I think that the thought experiment is more fun. I don't know about the actual specifics about whether, they can be recalled or not, what those are, what the details are there. But in terms of a thought experiment, it's a good one. The idea would be that if the House of Representatives currently is controlled by the Democrats, and there's a 5 congressperson margin, for example. I don't know that it is that, but if it is, and Arizona recalled the 5 Democratic congresspeople because, Arizona hypothetically found that there was a problem with the last election and maybe they didn't really win. So we go through a recall 5 of them. That's creates vacancies. They get replaced with Republicans. The balance of power in the House shifts. Now you sort of can go through an impeachment party bonanza. The Republicans can initiate impeachment proceedings against everybody else and go hog wild with that. Probably an unlikely development, but it's a fun thought experiment and kind of fun to play around with those things. I definitely like that. Let's see. Another one came in from Eddie Oliver. Says, do you think those members of the Bipartisan Commission were Nazis? Because if you're white, it seems you're either a racist or a Nazi. Sorry, I didn't make the rules. I just enforced them. Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's the only logical conclusion. And, ordinarily, I wouldn't be somebody to jump in on that and say, yeah, they are racist Nazis, probably, really. But AOC confirmed it for us. Cori Bush confirmed it for us. So I like you, Eddie, I don't make the rules. Sometimes I have confusion about them because they're complicated and they're changing a lot and we're adding new pronouns and new alphabet letters and all sorts of stuff. It's very complicated. But I think they're probably, just to be safe, they're racist Nazis. You can be safe with that. Let's just combine the two. Let's stop mincing words and we'll be good to go. And that was, I think, that was the last super chat. And we got a couple more. We're going to get through them. Jeremy says, Rob, super fund has to do with EPA. It's a fund used to clean up polluted land designated as a super fund. Okay, so I didn't know that. We have screw IRS Monero rules. I want the IRS to track transactions over $10,000 with Monero. So we got somebody who's pumping Monero here. I don't have any problem with that. That's all right. We have does Wide Awake says, does liking Kid Rock make you racist? And apparently, I don't know. Maybe it does. I guess maybe it does. I listened to Kid Rock as a kid. He had that one song. It was hopping. How did it go? I forget. I can't remember. I'm not going to sing it here. All right. Great questions. Really appreciate all the love and the support. A lot of those came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is where there's a lively chat always taking place. And we are going to welcome a couple new members. Big welcome, big shout outs to Janoid. Janoid, great name. Absolutely love it. Janoid is now with the community. Thank you so much for signing up, Janoid. We have Sweet Potato is also in the program. Potato is in the house along with Jay Fizzle signed up. We got 3 new additions to the community. Also, big welcomes to CD Gorley, Truman HW, and Sif Thea, available over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. $5 a month, $50 annually. If you want to join up and support the show, we do appreciate it. And of course, we invite you to join us if you are a member over there, August 28th, 2021, from 7 to 8 p.m. for our next monthly meetup. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be our 4th one. Just having a blast. They're a lot of fun. Registration form is up and over there. A lot of other really good reasons to sign up over there. There's a free copy of my book. There are promo codes for a lot of my courses. And there's a lot of awesome people over there sharing links throughout the day. So we'd love to invite you to come check us out there. Before we wrap up, we'll give some shout outs over in the chat. Over on Locals, we've got Baranski, NY Renal MDs in the house, along with those two are talking right now predominantly. Who else is here? We've got want to know. Arnie B5, my chat is frozen. That's why I can't see anything. Oh, Soul Vikings in the house. And Joe Snow want to know. We also on YouTube have Skull Cram. We have Ashley, Truth Hearts, K Bean, Mad Peanut, Blake, Lauren S., Anthony Williams, and many others. Everybody, thank you so much for all of your support here today, both on Locals and with those great super chats on YouTube. Means the world. I appreciate you being here. Reminder to be back here tomorrow. Same place, same time, because we're going to do it all again. I forgot about that. We are going to do it again, but I'm not real sure if the time is going to be at the same time. I might have to push it back. I actually have to go to an event tomorrow unexpectedly. So I got to go there, and I'm going to be racing back. It's about 3 hours both directions. So I'm going to be on the road early, skidding back in here. And so I might have to push the show back a little bit. I'm going to try not to, but if I do, that's the reason why. But as it stands currently, same place, same time. 4 p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. And for that one Florida man, everybody else, thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Have a great night. Bye-bye.